Hey guys, it's Jason and Mike again here on episode 7 of the Full Quadrant podcast. Mike, how are you doing?
Pretty good. The
Awesome.
weather's nice over here. We're supposed to be 78 today.
Wow. That is nice weather. We're touching almost 70 degrees here, so we're not far behind.
I think I like that better. I like just below 75 is like perfect.
Yeah, where it's comfortable and warm, but it's not hot.
Yep.
Yeah, that's nice. So this is our first podcast since it's been a couple weeks, and it's been our first podcast back from after having attended the new Silver School in Missouri. Real quick, a lot of our viewers attended that school. A lot of our viewers either have gone or recently attended or are looking to attend. Let's maybe do a quick recap and just give some highlights from some takeaways from that school.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like Bart was on. Like whoever didn't go to this school missed out, I believe. Even though
salt in their wounds,
every school has been, really good. This was just, I think it was just a little bit stronger.
And what was good about it? I mean, your takeaways are going to be different from someone else's takeaways. So, like in specifics, what stood out to you? Like, what was like the content? Why was it so much different?
I think it was the energy from Bart, mostly.
The energy?
Yeah, and he was, to me, that's what it seemed like to me. Like he was, I think
he put on a good show.
He put on a good show, a lot of good information.
Right.
A lot of relevant stories to the NePoPo, silver.
Right.
And I just enjoyed it. Right. And there was a lot of good people, the silver students, like a lot of knowledgeable people.
Well, and for me, like the back and forth he has with Michael, like it just creates this really panoramic conversation in lecture, right? That just provides so much information. And so, yeah, I agree. I think the entertainment value was certainly there. I think the students came really prepared. I think a lot of them had done their homework, and that showed in some of the impromptu stage moments that some of the students had. You could tell that some were better prepared than maybe in past schools. And so I think by taking the school seriously, taking the homework seriously, really digesting that in advance of attending, I think that really made a difference.
I think that's like, speaking of the homework, right? I think people don't understand how important that homework is.
Yeah.
And to go back, like when you go back, you should do all the homework again after going to silver.
Because you'll learn it a different way.
You're going to look at it differently, right? Just like you're going to look at it, because especially when I first, we had the same homework. But when I was first watching like the movies, I was just watching them not through the lens of like a dog trainer, right? I was just watching them because we had to watch them.
Right.
After going to the school, and then I went back and watched them again, right? And that's where now I started seeing everything through a dog training, like a training lens, right? And how every part of the movies had to do with dog training, right? And what we were learning. So, and what has to do with NePoPo, right? And I encourage everybody to go back and go through the homework again. You will notice things differently after going to silver than you did before.
Yep.
At least that was for me. I don't know if everybody will do the same, but that was it for me.
Yeah. It was really good. And this is actually kind of a nice segue into our topic of conversation for today's episode. Because again, we found that there were students there having really dove into the homework. It showed the fact that they were very engaged and prepared. They had a lot of ignition, right? Obviously taking from the talent code, the focus on ignition as a requirement for learning and creating talent. So that leads us to our conversation for today's or for today's topic. And I want to kind of set the stage with asking you a question about what does it take to train a dog really well? Or, and this could be simultaneously, you can think about like, how does learning take place, right? It could be a student in a lecture or a classroom, or it could be a dog in a training situation. Like what is probably the biggest requirement for successful learning and behavioral acquisition?
Well, like one thing is that the dog, the person, they have to want to be there, right? They
Yeah,
have to want to be there so that if you don't want to be there, you're not going to learn anything,
right.
you know, which kind of goes to dogs. If their motivation is elsewhere, they're not going to learn what you're trying to teach them, right? But at the same time, you don't want a going to dogs, you don't want a dog where you are having to push it all the time, right? Where what you want is an active dog.
Yeah, yeah,
So that it's engaged, it's active, it's wanting to do things, and then whatever you try to do after that point is going to be, you know, relatively easy as far as getting things done, right?
yeah.
I think Bart had had an active dog at the Silver School.
Right.
Tashi.
Yeah. You know, one of his sayings, you know, his examples of ignition, activity, and active dog, he says, don't expect to push your car to the racetrack and win. Right? Meaning if the tank is empty and you have to, if you have to push your car to get to the racetrack, you're not going to win the race. Right? You have to have that full tank. That gasoline has to be present. There has to be that ignition. Other trainers, you know, across the industry are going to refer to that as engagement. They want engagement from the dog, right? They talk about the need for engagement. Most people, when they say engagement, what they mean is they want the personal relationship with the dog. They want to see the dog personally, like engaging with you, giving you eye contact, saying that they're focused on you. But top training goes deeper than engagement, because without motivation, you have no engagement, right? Like if you're not a source of reward, or if you're not perceived as the gatekeeper for something that the dog wants or you know has value in, there's no engagement. So a level deeper than engagement is motivation. And that's where dog trainers need to focus. And that's motivation, or call it ignition, right? Bart and Michael are ignition trainers. They teach you how to create the desire to just come spilling out of the dog. And when you have that, then training can begin, and it can be very successful. It can also be very fast, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it kind of goes to like I said, active dog, ignition. They're kind of going together. They kind of go together. The difference, I think, is ignition is just the desire, like to do something, right?
Yep.
It's the desire. Whereas an activity or an active dog
is the manifestation of a dog's level of ignition.
Yeah. And then going into wanting to do things.
Right.
You know,
right.
For whatever reason it is.
So that, you know, a natural follow-up to that question. So it takes activity, right? Active dog, the saying goes, active dog, reactive handler, reactive trainer, or reactive owner, right? That's the construct we want to find ourselves in before training begins, so that we don't end up, like you said, pushing our dog and like forcing the dog into the box or into a cookie cutter system in order to get it trained.
Yeah. So first you need ignition. The dog wants to do something. And then you need an active dog. And an active dog to me means the dog is trying to figure things out.
So what are signs of that? Like what are signs that a dog is trying to figure something out, or what are signs of an active dog to you?
So for NePoPo, it's the dog that's trying to push you to get you to give it reward, food,
To
ball,
better its own situation,
something.
right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's a dog that's looking, how can I better my own situation? How can I get you, the handler, the trainer, to do what I want so I can better my own situation? Right.
Right.
That's an active dog.
Yep.
But the difference, I mean, a lot of people will have active dogs. And there's a difference with an active dog that has been shaped first and an active dog that has only been lured. And what you see in the difference is the lured dog will only offer behaviors that it has learned, and it will cycle through those behaviors. And people can do that. Just go out and just go out wherever you're going to train with your dog. If you've only had a lured dog, right? Go out, give it a reward for nothing. If it's ball, food, whatever, and then get the reward. If it's a ball, get the ball back. If it's food, you don't have to, but, and then just stop and do nothing. Just sit there and watch your dog. Most dogs that have been lured, they'll start offering the behaviors that they've been lured into: a sit, a down, a stand. They may come close to you in the front, right? If you've taught that. Whatever they've learned already, they will start offering, and they'll just cycle through those behaviors because they're like, they are trying to push you too, right? They are an active dog, but there's no creativity.
Right.
All they can offer is what they've learned. You know,
So that makes me think of, so I've got a dog and its owner, a handler in my Schutzen club, and the dog is phenomenal. The dog has a super protection routine. The dog's a super tracker. And the one thing we've always struggled with is it can be hit or miss in obedience, meaning the level of activity, right? Sometimes the dog comes out really strong with emotion. Other days it's a little tempered and a little bit more moderate in its ignition or the level of drive that it shows in the obedience. And we've been, trying to get consistency, because that's what we need before we commit to going to a trial. Is we need to have a level of confidence knowing that this dog will be where we want it to be in its obedience phase. And so in training, we've really thrown the kitchen sink at the situation, trying to come up with new ways to do it. And I was like, you know what, look, behavioral science says that reward behaviors you want, provide consequences for unwanted behaviors. However, when it comes to like the drive, the ignition, the temperament, the emotion of the dog, just like what you were saying, is I'm like, okay, we're going to take a step back from formal training this dog, and we're just going to break a bunch of rules here. We're just going to go out and reward this dog for free, right? We're going to have no corrections, no consequences when it looks away, no consequences when it doesn't do perfectly, and we're going to just pump this dog up with good feelings, right? And in a matter of a couple weeks, like we started doing that like, a few weeks ago, and then I saw the dog, maybe last week, and the dog's emotion had changed. Now, there's a lot that we need to tighten up now, but the dog is really feeling itself and is really powerful. And I said, look, we're moving the needle in the right direction. Let's keep going. And they're like, you sure? I'm like, yeah, like it'll be easier to squeeze a lemon. You can juice a lemon when there's juice in it, but you can't squeeze the lemon if there's no juice in it. And so it's worked really well, but it does go against some of the behavioral science constructs where it's like, oh, reward what you want, provide consequences for what you don't want. You kind of got to step outside of that. And it's dealing with this active dog situation. And I like that you brought that up, because, rewarding for no reason gives the dog a lot of hope. And that's what it does.
Yes. And I mean, some people just might say that's engagement, but there's a difference between engagement. Usually when people say engagement, they reward their dog for engaging with them. Right. Whereas the difference for what you're saying is you're just giving it, I don't care if you engage with me. Like, I'm just going to reward you out of nowhere.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's what we've been doing with the dog, is like, even if the dog is not correct in the behavior, we're still rewarding the dog. And it's like the dog is like surprised by it. And it's actually you can see a noticeable lift in the spirit of the dog.
Yeah. But that's where going back to like a Bart saying, where he said just, oh, if you want to make something stronger, right, a behavior, just all the rewards go to that behavior, right? It doesn't matter if it's shitty, if it's good, if it's perfect, if it's not, just reward it for anything it does with that behavior. And you will see that the dog starts loving that behavior. And that's the key, right?
Right.
Is loving what you're doing and loving the behaviors.
Right. It's all about creating love for the behavior. And there's nothing, again, we've had a lot of comments about different methodologies and different camps and schools and things like that. There's nothing wrong with like a dog who loves to work for its owner. There's nothing wrong with that. And again, a byproduct of good dog training is a good relationship. So if the method is good, you'll have the byproduct will be a good relationship with your dog, right? But I think you can go beyond. You don't have to make that the relationship with the dog does not need to be the end all be all, because you can still have the relationship and go beyond that and get love of behavior without sacrificing the dog's view of the relationship it has with you.
Yeah. But I think we talked about that before, was, does the dog love doing behaviors for you, or does it love doing the behaviors in general? You know,
So
that's because if I train a dog to love the behaviors, and then we do have a relationship, right? There's no way we can't. Okay. If I hand that dog off to you, he's going to want to work for you because now you are having him do the behaviors he loves doing anyway.
right.
You know, whereas I think the other way, it's like the dog is like, no, I only want to work for you.
Agreed.
So
yeah.
you can train either way. I think you just have to look at the end outcome, right? If you're training, say if you're training a dog for other people, you don't need the relationship with you as much. The relationship will come, but you want the dog loving the behavior. So when their owners are giving the commands, they're gonna do them because they love them, right? They
And
love
the same
behaviors.
thing, correct. Yes. A dog trained through a relational construct, it's not a transferable dog, because the relationship can't be transferred and projected onto somebody else, right? And that goes for reinforcement and creating good behaviors. It also goes for punishment, right? You can't transfer reliable behaviors that have been punished if they've been done so using the relationship to punish the behavior, right? If the dog doesn't find other reasons to keep itself in check, the same can be said of punishment, right? It's an interesting conversation, but we've already kind of hashed that out. But I did want to ask you, these are all signs of an active dog, like the dog that's acting on its ignition, a dog that's like trying to find things, make things happen, shows creativity. Like, how do you develop that?
Yeah.
How do you develop that in a dog that doesn't have that?
Well, let me take a step back, because we talked about a lure dog, right? That's going to be offering the behaviors it has learned.
Right.
The difference with a shape dog is that it will be offering other things. It will start looking around and saying, what do I have to do
to impress you?
To get you to react to me, right? So the dog is saying, what can I do to make my handler active? Because that's what it is, right? We react to the dog. And they may offer some behaviors they know, depending on the picture, but they will quickly go to offering new things, depending on the environment they're in, right? They may go try to touch stuff. They may try to climb on stuff, go under stuff, but they're thinking, they're creative, you know? And I think that's where the difference in activity goes, like between the two dogs. Now going to, what was the question you said again?
How do you develop an active dog? Like what things do you do to develop that activity in a dog who maybe you find yourself, so we've kind of talked about the signs of an active dog, what it looks like, how to identify an active dog, if the dog is truly active or not. But what if you identify that the dog you're working with is not as active as you need for the training that you're about to set out to do, or the goals that you have for the dog. What can you do to develop that?
Two things you can do. One is that you can, like, kind of like what you did with the other dog, but like you can go out with the dog and just reward it for trying to push you, right? Like I go out to a field, go to a training area, and just like keep walking away from the dog, keep walking away from the dog. And when the dog comes around, is like, hey, what are you doing? Reward, right? Then you walk away from the dog. The dog comes back to your reward. So the dog is becoming active and trying to make you give the reward to them. Okay. The other way was just introduce shaping, but not shaping necessarily for specific behaviors, you know, like sit down, stand, whatever. Just shaping in general. Have you know, your aquarium, which, like, if people don't know what aquarium is, it's just an area that is
your classroom.
Yeah, a classroom, an area that doesn't have much to interact in. You can make it sterile, right? And put something in that area that's different, new, and reward the dog for starting to interact with that thing. You know, and then you will see the dog, when they start getting it, they start getting creative. And there's ways to shape. You know, you don't want to stay on one thing for too long if it's something that you're not going to keep anyway. But that's how you create that active dog trying to figure things out.
So creating value in interacting with its environment, right?
Correct. That's a good way to put it.
Teaching the dog that there's value in the environment. So it's worth exploring its environment instead of just sitting and minding its own business. You want it to explore the world. What comes to mind for me, like, I mean, in young puppies, like sometimes people have brought puppies and I'm like, look, this dog's not ready to train because he's either timid or he's just not interested. He's not motivated for anything. And so what, you know, the things that you should do, like a list of do's and don'ts about developing an active dog. Well, first of all, make sure that you're not punishing a puppy, you know, for things. You kind of got to let the dog, like you said, create that confidence in its environment, that it has to be willing to explore, right? You know, and what's the first puppies do when they get home? They start chewing on rugs, they start, you know, scratching, you know, jumping on furniture, and people jump to no, right? They want to tell the dog no.
Yes. And that's the thing, is like when you put too much control at a young age, you kill that creativity, right? You kill that activity too.
Yeah, you're punishing the dog for being active when that's the key ingredient for good training.
Yep, exactly.
Right.
But that's where, like, with a puppy, you want to control its environment so that we don't always have to keep telling it no, you know.
Exactly. That's the way you get away from it, is you control the environment. You put it in a place where you won't have to say no, and it can still be happy-go-lucky. It's a padded room of sorts, you know, where, hey man, knock yourself out, be as active as you want, because I know you're not going to hurt yourself, you're not going to damage anything, and I'm not going to care about your level of activity, so I don't have to tell you no. So
exactly,
that's why kennels become so effective, is like, if you can't supervise the dog, put him in the kennel. And then when you can supervise the dog, you can take him to appropriate locations where he can have that outlet and not have to worry about, you know, being told. Curbing that level of activity in a young dog can really just kill their drive.
Yeah.
With puppies, like, be careful about punishing a puppy for being too active, right? A lot of people are like, oh, my puppy's crazy, right? Like, and your advice is the best advice. It's like, make sure you control the environment that they're in so that you can avoid having to tell them no, right? Or punishing their activity, because a dog's not going to know. They're just being a dog.
What I tell people too is, like, your dog, when it first comes into your home, it does not know the rules. If you don't set any rules for it to follow, it's going to make up its own rules, right? So it doesn't know it's not allowed to chew something that's furniture. It doesn't know the difference.
Right.
That's where your management comes in to show them, no, you cannot chew on this, but not by, applying any punishment. It's just by managing them and saying, just, not letting them start it in the first place.
Avoiding the battle is the best way to win.
Yeah. But then going the opposite of the active dog, right? If you're a pet owner and you don't want that active dog,
Right.
right? Now you're going to do the opposite. You're going to actually is not let the dog be active, not reward it for being active. You're going to reward it for the
Calm.
opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Calmness.
being calm.
Yeah.
So it goes like whatever you want. Do you want
you have to know your outcomes
and activity? Yeah. That's for everything, correct? You have to know the advantages and disadvantages of everything, because the same thing can be used to make a dog active and it can also be used to calm them down.
Right. So another thought that comes to mind about, like, again, because creating activity is really difficult, the kind of activity that we're talking about. And, so another way to do that is, waiting till the dog is ready to train. That's one of the hardest things for owners or handlers or trainers to do, is wait till the dog is ready before you start training. Because most of the time we take a dog into the program, and if we're training, we want to start training immediately, because half the time that's what we're getting paid for. And then also it's the dopamine rush for the human involved in that scenario, because we like training. We want to train, right? So we want to be going through the motions of click, pay, or yes, pay, good boy, rah, rah, the dog, all that stuff. It gives us that dopamine release, right? But if the dog isn't ready for that, and showing that, hey, I want to be part of this, like, he understand, like, if he doesn't show that he understands his actions influence his environment, the time is not right, or as Bart and Michael say, the water is not boiling, and you shouldn't begin to cook spaghetti.
Correct. Yeah, that's perfect. And I think everybody at some point falls into that trap that you just get the dog and just start training.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's not as strong. The dog doesn't actually want to train, and that goes back to what we said in the beginning, where now you're pushing the dog, whereas you create that activity first, well, through ignition first, create the ignition and then create the activity. And then the dog is wanting to figure out things, so that learning comes easy.
Yeah. So an example of waiting till the dog is ready to train is, okay, so maybe you get up in the morning, you let the dog out, dog goes potty, comes in, has breakfast. And then maybe you have to get on a morning work call, do some meetings or whatever. And then you come back midday, and that's when you have like a chunk of time, maybe during lunch or something, to train the dog. But by then it's like snooze time for the dog, and the dog's not ready. But you're like, well, this is the only time I have to train. You go outside with the dog, and the dog is still sleepy. Maybe it's not interested in training, and you start going through the motions of, whatever it is that you're working on. You might need to consider training at a different time where the dog is actually ready. A lot of times for most dogs, they're always happy and energetic first thing in the morning. So like taking advantage of that activity level first thing in the morning, maybe adjusting your schedule, waking up a little bit earlier to train a dog. So my Malinois, when I first had him, right, I really wanted an explosive dog. So I trained first thing in the morning. He's always ready to go, but he was even more so after a night in the kennel, and he just wouldn't stop. And even putting him away after 20 to 30 minutes of, some training, he was still like trying to pull me back to the yard to go back and keep working, So managing your time is going to be important. Finding out when is your dog most active and take advantage of that time, and let him think he's in control of you.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, that's the thing is, and people fall into that because they feel like, okay, I have to get so many repetitions in. I have to get this dog trained. I have to get the repetitions in. But if the dog is not really engaged or whatever, then you're not getting any repetitions in any way. That's what the thing that came to mind was when you create an active dog, they are, every time you're ready to go, they're ready to go. Right? They're always like active because now they feel like they control things.
And for you, it's what you just said is super important because it's the quality over quantity. And I had to go through that. I had to go through several years before I even arrived at that understanding where nowadays I'll take a couple quality repetitions and end the training there over thinking that the number of reps matters, right? I would take 5 excellent repetitions of performing a behavior over 25 mediocre repetitions because my mindset has changed. The quality sticks better with the dog, right? Repetition does not have what I thought the value it had before. And now I prioritize quality over quantity, and I'm seeing better results training in less time.
But to take that a step further, what it is when the dog is first learning, okay, you have to do less repetitions. You do less and you increase repetitions as the dog learns, say, a particular behavior. And once the dog knows the behavior and you've created love for the behavior, now you can do as many repetitions as you want because the dog loves doing it. Just like if you love doing something, you will do it all day long, right? If you don't love doing something, you get bored right away, or you move on to something else. And it's the same thing. Do shorter repetitions, less repetitions as the dog is learning. And then once the dog knows, and the key thing, loves the behavior, now you can just ask for it all day long and it'll keep doing it. Right. And that's the difference in numbers of repetitions when you're training, is where the dog is in the learning process. And the other thing you can do is just go out and push your dog away. No, leave me alone. Leave me alone. Just keep pushing away until it's like, hey, let's do something.
Right.
And that's that active dog will always be pushing you.
Right.
So that's good what you said.
Yeah. It's interesting the evolution we take in our personal journeys and finding these things out, because you hear them and now it really sinks in and I hear it differently, even though I've been told this for so long,
Yeah. Well, there's truth in that, where you can hear the same thing, 10 times, but then the 11th time when you hear it, even though it's the same thing, you're finally in a position to understand it and to let it click.
When I think about an active dog, right? What are another sign of an active dog is a dog that anticipates good things in its life, right? So that shows itself and manifests itself in a dog who maybe before you even grab the leash off of the wall to go for the walk, maybe he comes and sits right next to you in anticipation of you putting the collar on or the harness or whatever you're using. Anticipation is a really good thing. A lot of people have problems with anticipation and they look at it, but they look at it as a bad thing. Anticipation is a good problem to have, right? Because what it means is that the dog has value in the reward event, whether that's a behavior, whether that's an opportunity, or whether it's some form of reinforcement. They value what is about to happen, and it's a good thing.
Well, yeah, and they're telling you that they understand. They're starting to understand what's going to happen.
And how to influence what happens, how to make it happen. So, for example, let's talk about IGP, right? Dogs who maybe you're walking and they sit before you tell them to sit, because you always reward them to sit, in the sit out of motion exercise. And the dog sits before you tell it to sit. People they think of it as a bad problem, and maybe they go to correct the dog for sitting before they told it to sit. but really that's not the correct way to deal with that problem. Correcting the anticipated behavior is only going to make you worse off.
Yes. And that's where it's you have to differentiate with the anticipation is, and that's where the thing that comes to mind is what I heard from Bart too, is if your dog anticipates, to reward it, stop training and figure out why he anticipated. Right? Is it because he's excited, like you said, he's like, I know what this is and I want to get to it faster? Right? Or is it the picture you've shown him? Is it something you've shown him where he's like, oh, I think I know what's coming because of the picture?
So
right?
What I've done in the past with dogs that anticipate, and again, when they do anticipate, I'm happy because I'm like, oh, they know that this behavior is it influences their environment. It increases their advantage in their life, right? What I've done to solve the problems and what works really well is you reward the dog before they anticipate. Before the dog sits from a heel, I reward in the heel and the dog gets value, and you balance the scales. Maybe there's too much weight on the sit and not enough weight on the heel. And then you bring them into balance. And now the dog is just going to wait until you tell it to do the thing you want it to do. Maybe that's continue healing. Maybe that's a sit, a down, a stand, or maybe it's a send out. But the solution to anticipation is rewarding before the dog anticipates. And then they think to themselves, oh, I was wrong. Maybe that's not.
Because you're disrupting the pattern. So usually, a lot, or not usually, a lot of times anticipation comes because you've created a pattern, right?
Yeah.
For like in IGP, if you always say sit at your 12th step,
sure,
right, your dog isn't going to anticipate that.
They're counting the steps, and then they're just going to sit because that's the routine is I sit on my 12th pace.
Yeah, and maybe they can't count, but they're going by where you are on the field, and maybe this time you started a little bit further back than where you normally start. So the dog is looking at the picture of the field, be like, oh, we always sit when you get to about this point.
Right.
So instead of him counting, they're just looking at the picture. And that's where in your training, that's why you have to stop and think and say, why did my dog anticipate? Is it a pattern I created?
Yeah.
Or is it something else? And then you can go and say, okay, I will sit at step 11. Next time I'll sit at 14, next time at 12, next time at 13, just so that the dog doesn't know when it's coming, but has an idea. So he'll still kind of be ready to sit, but he won't sit without you saying the word sit.
But this goes back to NePoPo is like, we don't want the dog cueing off of visuals. I mean, there's times when you do want that, but the goal of good dog training is verbal cue. Listen to my words, do it on cue every time with heart and soul, right?
Yeah.
Do it on cue. Don't do it until you're cued to do it, right? So don't even though anticipation is not a bad thing, we don't want him to anticipate because maybe there's a reason we want to walk further.
For the IGP people too, say you always want to do the sit out of motion on step 12, right? That's where in training, you always do it on step 13. So what happens and then in the trial is the only time you do it on 12, right? Whereas the dog it's anticipating it's coming, and then it comes, right? I don't know if that would work or not. I think it would depend on the dog, but that's an idea.
Yeah.
Because it's always, the dog knows it's coming because it's getting close and he's ready to do it, and you go boom.
Right.
That would stop you from them anticipating and sitting before you said sit, which I don't know. How many points do you lose for that? If you lose any?
I mean, if the dog doesn't sit.
If it sits before you say sit.
Oh, well, if you see here's the thing. If you see the dog starting to sit before you say, you better quickly say sit. Because if you say it before the dog goes down, I think you might be able to get away with it if the judge isn't really paying too much attention. But if the dog sits and you're like a pace away from it and they're like, oh, sit, now you're losing points, right? But that's
But
why
then you have to be looking down a little bit too.
well, I mean, keep it in your peripheral vision, but if you see your dog start to sit, even if you haven't gone the required paces, I would rather say sit, really fast and loud, than and get commented on, oh, you made the dog sit too early. You might not lose points for that, versus if the dog sits before you've told to sit, then you've got a problem, which is that's a whole other conversation.
You see that in the blind search, that the dog, before the person says revere, right, it's already turning towards the other blind,
Right,
because of that anticipation.
right, because they know the drill is just go to blind, 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 but really it's go to the blind, search, come back to the handler, and then the handler directs you to which blind you're supposed to go to. But the dog just gets the pattern because they know that they've run 6 blinds 100 times in their life,
Right.
leading up to that trial. So they just go on autopilot. But what you should see is the dog that returns in the direction of the handler and then gets redirected to the next blind. And so it shouldn't be straight blind, blind to blind. It should be blind, handler, blind.
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
And same thing for hunting dogs. Like the dog needs to come back to the hunter to receive further instruction, right?
Yep.
Or the service dog, or the service dog. So yeah, don't punish a young dog's activity level or for being too active. Work around the time where the dog is most active and utilize that to capitalize. And then the dog's going to start understanding, like you said, his influence, his ability. When he wants something from his environment, the environment responds in kind, right? So active dog, reactive environment, active dog, reactive handler. I think the reason this concept of an active dog was really difficult for me personally to wrap my head around when I was first getting into dog training and I heard about the active dog, reactive handler, because I think everyone's perception, at least in the pet side of things, as an owner, you think, oh, I want to tell my dog something and I want him to react to what I'm telling him, right? So they have that mentality and they think, oh, a good trained dog should respond or react to what the handler's doing. But and that's what you get. That's what I got stuck on that. I was like, how is the dog going to be obedient if he's active, right? And I'm reacting to my dog. How can I get an obedient dog? It's not about the response to the cues. It's about the dog always being willing to perform the behavior he's told to perform. And you only get that with a dog who thinks that they are the active one and their environment is reactive.
Yeah.
Right. But I think everyone, for the same reason, like when they hear active dog, reactive handler, it's hard for them to grasp that concept because in their mind, they want their dog to listen to them, which we do too. I mean, we can't go to trial and tell our dog to sit and the dog doesn't sit. We lose points, right?
Yeah.
We can't tell the dog to out and the dog doesn't out and it loses points, right? So we do need to have that level of control, but we want the inner desire of the dog we want the dog to think it's his idea and we're giving him the opportunity because he's bullying us, saying, hey, tell me to bite, tell me to bark, tell me to retrieve this duck, tell me to touch the elevator button, or tell me to bring you a backpack, right?
Yeah. And then also the thing is, you also don't want that all the time with certain dogs.
Absolutely.
So you can put that activity on cue, either with, like, say, IGP, putting on the first saber, right, or the ring sports, taking off a collar, or a cue, like in free shaping, like I did before. I would say, are you ready to go to work? Right. Or even for training, a verbal cue like that.
Or
you ready to work? Something that tells the dog, now I want you to be active.
Or as Bart said in this last school, and I've heard him say it before, but he just reminded me of it again in this last silver school, putting on a certain cologne to cue the dog into a certain, that they're about to, only train wearing a certain cologne and then go to trial wearing that same cologne.
Yeah. But he talked about that. I heard that from him. I don't remember. I think it was the first time I heard him speak, was 2015. But you have three different, for IGP,
Sure.
right? You have tracking, obedience, and protection. You have to be disciplined. But what you do is you put a different, say, cologne. You have three different collars, three different first savers or whatever. And you put a different cologne on for each collar that has to do with tracking. One cologne for tracking, one cologne for obedience, one cologne for protection. And because in IGP you can do it because they're all separated, right? You don't go from one to the other. So you can have a Ziploc bags with your tracking collar, your obedience collar, and your protection collar. And they have the scent because we know scent is what very strong for a dog, right? Probably the strongest of all the senses. And now, but you have to do it in training. Before you go out to train, you put on that collar with that scent. And then when you're done, you take it off. And then before you go on the field for obedience, you put on that collar, right? Or it's not just in the trial, but in training. But that's the hardest part is the discipline to do it in training. So if you do any obedience, here comes the collar. Right. Then if you're going to switch to protection in that same training session, you take off that collar, put on the protection collar. So now that emotion for that particular phase is there because of the smell of the collar.
Right. Yeah. And the last thing about, you know, developing an active dog is, you know, dogs that have good motivation in either food or toy or something, as long as you have their focus on you and they're like willing to interact with you, the withholding of something of value can also be a good motivator, right? It can make them more active, right? It's like if my dog knows I have the ball and I haven't brought it out or I haven't told him to do something, he's like spinning up like the turbo in his engine is, you know, it's like spooling up.
Because you're creating the frustration. Right. And that frustration gets their blood going in everybody, dogs and people. Yeah. Yep. Perfect. You know, hopefully those are helpful to the viewers and, you know, the people watching this. Hopefully that's gives you some ideas and ways to think about active dog. You just mentioned why an active dog may not be necessary. Like you mentioned companionship dogs trained for service work where you can't have an innovative dog. You just need a very rote dog, a dog going through certain motions or certain routines. You know, seeing eye dogs, like, you know, can't be too creative. You know, that would be a disaster. Yeah, they have to not necessarily be creative, but they have to be able to think in certain instances, right? Totally. But I'm going to see a dog today. It's a puppy, and one of the owners is in a wheelchair. So, yeah, we're going to train him differently than if we're training a sport dog. Right. Because we don't want certain things from that dog. And that's the other thing with shaping, right? To create that activity for somebody that's in a wheelchair, they're not able to lure certain things, right? Right. So they can still go and train a dog that's where the shaping comes in, where they can sit in their chair, you know, they don't have to get up if they can even get up. And they can have the dog learn things away from them, you know, which is kind of what you're going to need for a service dog when you're in a chair, because you're going to have the dog go away from you to do certain things, from opening a door to picking things up, right, to getting new things, right, that you may need, medicine for diabetic alert dog. Sure. Right. So there's a lot of times you want an active dog and a lot of times you don't want a completely active dog. So I'm just trying to think, is there a style of training where active dog is not required? When you say style, like method? I don't know. I think a lot of IGP people, they just do the routines, right? They only train the routine and that's it. There's nothing else. I think with that, you don't need an active dog. Like it's just the dog is going to know what's coming and doesn't have to think even. It just knows what's coming. You've created
But
a pattern.
is that best? Is that best for the outcome of going to trial where there's less control over the dog? Can you confidently move to that stage and feel good about what you're about to go on the field and do, if that's been the case?
I don't know. I think that leads to problems because it kind of creates a little bit. I think it may create a little bit flatter dog, and now because the person sees the dog is flat, now they try to inject that, more energy into the dog, and now you get conflict and problems instead of from the beginning just creating that active dog, and then going in, not it knows everything to do and it's waiting for you to tell it what to do instead of anticipating everything.
Right. Yeah. So what are your takeaways? What would you say are your biggest takeaways for people listening in? And
it's know what you're trying to accomplish, and if you have too much of an active dog, it can be a headache. If you don't have it on cue, right? If you don't have a time where you can tell your dog to relax, then it's going to always be trying to do something, right? It's going to try to be active because it thinks it controls everything.
Right.
So it's know what you're trying to accomplish and use that as the starting point, meaning, do you want a more active dog or less active? Do you want the dog to only follow directions, or you want the dog to be thinking?
Yeah.
And be creative. And that's all it is. I mean, in general, for all training, it's just figure out where you want to be at the end, and you start with that in mind.
Yep.
It's
a shorter one today, but
yeah,
it doesn't downplay the significance of this topic. I don't think it's not a lot covered. There's clearly a lot covered about ignition, but like active dog is really the key to success in dog training. When you want heart and soul as the outcome, you need that component for sure. And hopefully this is, giving people some new ideas, some things to think about. As always, subscribe, share this with your friends, leave us a comment, tell us, if there's some questions or things you want to listen to, topic wise forward. We have a long list of topics, but we're always interested to hear what our viewers want to know about.
Yes. And then you have some gold schools coming up, right?
Yeah. I've got one in a couple weeks. I'm gearing up for. It's with Arapahoe County Sheriff's Department in Colorado. So I'll be there the end of the month. And then I've got a couple in spring and summer. And then looking forward to ours in Texas, but that's a ways away. That's October.
Yeah.
And then I've got a bunch of other events. I've got some seminars, some workshops of people that are coming in to do some stuff with my club. But yeah, looking forward to a fun year. And we'll see where that takes us.
Yep. I'm looking forward to coming up there at the end of May.
Yeah, it's going to be a good time. We have Marco Gonzalez coming out for protection workshop, 3-day protection workshop. Should be awesome. I mean, if you've worked with Marco, the work is always incredible. It's poetry in motion. And I've got a lot of dogs in my club that are gearing up for going to trial. So it's a great time to get trial ready and, kind of test out their skills on a new helper. So really looking forward to it, and having you out as well is going to be a lot of fun. It's always a good time.
Nice. Awesome.
So are you planning on bringing both dogs?
I will bring a Bull Con.
Yeah. Okay,
So-
cool.
All right.
Awesome. All right.
Perfect. That was great.
Hey,
Good talking
chatting
to
with
you
Mike.
again.
All right, we'll talk to you. Have a good
Bye.
one. See ya.